What's your best true spooky story? Serious. Story 1. I've posted this on my other account, copying and pasting it here. The scariest thing I've had happen while camping. So I live in Eastern Oregon, and my mom lives in the Western Oregon. I went to visit her for the summer and she's very outdoorsy, so we decided to take the 1-hour drive from her city to the coast. We end up at this free campsite at the top of this hill. Huge foothills of the coastal mountains, about a 25-minute drive from the top, where the campsite is, to the bottom where the main road was. And we were the only campers there. We relaxed for the rest of the day, made food, etc. A truck full of men drive up the hill and talk with my mom. IDK, what about? Wasn't suspicious at the time. And they leave us. Fast forward to the middle of the night. I wake up to my mom sitting straight up in the tent. I wake easily, so I heard her gasp, and it woke me. As soon as she saw I was awake, she put her hand over my mouth because I was starting to ask her what's wrong. It was dead silent, and all of a sudden you hear footsteps right beside the tent. The little flap that covers the zipper was even moving. Thankfully, my mom has quick wits and said very loudly, "Kenny, grab the gun." Kenny is my dad, although that doesn't matter. And mind you, he was not there. Just us girls, like I previously said. They left. No harm was done. Thank the Lord for my mama. TL.dr. 2 girls at a campsite alone. People outside tent in the middle of the night. My mom pulled some badassery. Answer. I was camping in a valley by myself with no cell service. I stayed late on a trail and ran into a nice local dude as it was getting dark. He showed me a local camping spot close to the road and the river, but camouflaged. I had a fire, drank beer, and listened to my friend's comedy podcast. I was loud and visible. Because it was dark already, I decided to sleep in the back of my truck, under my topper next to all of my gear, as opposed to setting up my tent. The next morning, I made a fire, cracked a beer, and started making breakfast. Then I noticed that there is a man at the edge of my camp. He comes closer, but never looks directly at me. This dude looks homeless, has a long ratty beard, and has at least 100 plastic grocery bags tied all over his clothes. I comment about how nice the day is. No response from him. I offer him breakfast. Nothing. He sort of paces around the perimeter of my camp. I offer him a beer, but he just turns around. The dude is just standing there back to me, wandering around. I'm realizing that there isn't going to be any good happenings. I had my bear spray and buck knife super close. I give him an ultimatum, motherfucker. You are either going to acknowledge me or leave immediately. He ignores me. I grab the bear mace and walk a few steps towards him. He sulked away, and I threw my chute in my truck and left that place right quick. I wonder if he had watched me during the night, and I thank my laziness for staying in my truck instead of a tent. Story 2. Posted this in another thread but seems appropriate here. Edited slightly to fit thread. I have had several dreams similar to what I am posting. I've been a caver in Florida for about 13 years, since I was about 6, and have been to a lot of caves. Never been afraid before this to go in one. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I started having this reoccurring dream. I would have it at least twice a year. Always the same, even though I would realize I was dreaming after the first few iterations. I would fall asleep and dream of being in a cave and going into this little hole in the bottom. Inside, I would see a 10 to 15 foot long corridor, about 2 to 4 feet high. At the end, it would always turn left, and I always saw a bent red stop sign at the end, like someone ripped off the top 2 feet and tossed it in. But I would always follow the corridor. I would turn and walk past the sign, despite being scared, despite many times knowing what was there, and the corridor would start descending, quickly opening up into a large vertical chamber with the path leading down in a corkscrew. Everything became blurry at this point, but it was always the same. I saw trash scattered on the walls. I saw the pit leading down to a curved floor. I saw things undefined, animals or people or something else at the bottom. And I saw my family, each with one of the things, being tortured and eliminated every time. And I could never do anything. After I saw that, I would be stuck for a few seconds until I felt more than saw everything turn and look at me. And I would wake up, not like a normal dream where you just drift to consciousness or a nightmare where you bolt up in fear, but like something pushed me out, like I wasn't supposed to be there. So I have this dream multiple times a year until I turned 15. I did tell a friend about the dream before what happens next. My father decided to take us to some caves we never had been before, one of which was Dog Drop. It was likely named so because someone either threw their pet in there or a coyote fell in, and the body was later discovered. Dog Drop had a roughly 30-foot rappel straight down to enter. I went down with my brother while my father waited up at the top. There was a hole in the ground. I started to feel uneasy, though I didn't know why. So I followed my brother into the hole. I felt worse as I moved down, and when I looked up I saw the same corridor, the same turn, the same wall, the same bottles at the corner, and I instantly was hit with this overwhelming sense of nausea and fear and being watched, and everything was screaming at me to leave. I froze and must have made some noise because my brother turned around and asked what was wrong. I managed to say I wanted to leave now and climbed out as quickly as I could, followed immediately by my brother. We packed up and left, never have gone back, and never will. Haven't told anyone what actually happened, just said I wasn't feeling well, and they forgot pretty quickly. The thing that really makes it creepy for me is I have never had the dream again. Year after year I would have it consistently, but it just stopped after that. But I still remember it all, and I still feel afraid, almost an external fear when I think of it. Previous edit for safety. I saw some people talking about looking up the cave visiting. Just want to say, never go caving, especially in an unfamiliar place, without a guide who belongs to a local group. If you belong to another group, but have never been in the area, it's best to talk to a local one before leaving. Caving is dangerous and people die. Don't be arrogant and try and rappel on a garden hose. Yes, someone did that. Yes, they died. The local grotto you can check out is called the Tampa Bay Area Grotto. And yes, the initials are TB. Answer. I do have a recurring dream about a specific place, the woods on some land that my grandparents used to own. I would spend a couple of weeks there every year until I was probably 12. After my grandmother passed away, I would have the same dream in which I would just sort of be walking around the property looking for something. I strongly feel as if I won't have closure unless I go back. Story 3. I lived in an old apartment in 2002. The place was built in 1900, so it was just over 100 years old when I moved in. The living room and kitchen were fine, but the bathroom and bedroom were unnerving, like I just always felt like I was being watched. especially in the bedroom if the closet door was open. Those unnerving feelings just became moderately uncomfortable as I settled in. I felt safe in the bedroom, but only if the door was locked. One night I was dead asleep when there was a loud bang on my bedroom door. When I got up the courage to get out of bed, I checked the apartment and all. The windows were closed and locked from the inside. The door still had the chain secured. No one was in there. I mentioned the closet in the bedroom. I never liked going in there, and I never liked if the door was open. For some reason, in my head I would hear gasping noises, so for that reason, the closet stayed closed. A month or more after I was woken to the bang on my door, I was dead asleep, but something woke me up, and it was a pressure on me like being held down. It was pitch black in my room. I couldn't see anything, but I knew some was standing over me. When I could finally turn on a bedside lamp, no one was there. After then, I couldn't sleep in the dark. I had to sleep with a lamp on. That incident scared the life out of me, and after that, the unnerving feeling of being watched intensified. Friends would come over and comment about being uncomfortable in the bathroom, like being watched. It became so uncomfortable for me when I had the chance to move to another unit. I jumped at it. I packed up and got out. After me, several people rented the apartment, and they would move out within months. I became friendly with the building manager, and I told him that I felt the place was haunted. He kind of laughed it off. Years after they were renovating the place, building manager was doing some painting in there. The building owner was there too. I went and checked out the apartment, and it looked nicer. It didn't feel as creepy. I got to talking with the building owner, and through the course of conversation, he just throws it out there that a former tenant committed tragic end in the closet by hanging themselves. He also mentioned that the original designer of the building lived in that apartment and died in there. I wasn't mad when I heard that, but felt validated that what I experienced was real. Story 4. When my grandparents bought their house for a family of 10, my grandpa found a fake wall upstairs. He tore it down to make more room for the family. Behind the wall were children's clothes and play toys, almost like they walked off the room in a hurry. My mom told me stories of sitting in her room and something circling the walls around her, sounding like wallpaper being torn. When she moved out, my aunt moved into the same room. She would wake up with pictures she hung up laying on her chest in the morning. My cousins also have stories of hearing footsteps coming up the stairs and stopping outside their door in the middle of the night. I still don't go upstairs at their house because it's always cold, and I get weird vibes up there. Even in my adult life, I have scary dreams that take place in their upstairs. Answer: great. I found a boarded up room in the house I just got. I'm going to fix it up into additional living space. Going to worry about ghosts now. Like the dark, long room with the creepy jerk bouncy horse and bassinet wasn't weird enough. Why are there no lights in there? It's already cold and I don't even want to clean it. WTF room. Edit. Shouldn't have read this shoot or anything. Walked out to the car to get something and noticed curtains pulled across a window upstairs. That wasn't like that a few days ago when I took photos, and I have the stairs boarded up currently. WTF. Story 5. While at uni, my friends and I ran out of booze. Hardly any shops were open because it was late on, so the only option was to walk the mile or so to the nearest 24-hour supermarket. Between the supermarket and the dorms we lived in was just row after row of suburban houses, which all looked the same. As we were walking down one road, we passed a field with a large campfire, and some people riding horses around it. There were people playing musical instruments and general sounds of a good time going on. The horses and fire and the lanterns which were dotted about gave it a very old-fashioned feel. Maybe 5 minutes after passing the field, now walking past houses again, one of my friends commented on how weird and out of place that gathering of people had been. My other friend and I had been thinking exactly the same thing, so, curious, we turned around and walked back to find out exactly what was going on. There was nothing there, not just no people or horses. There was no field, just more and more houses, even though we were absolutely certain we were on the right road. As we'd simply turned around, we walked up and down the neighboring roads too. We found nothing. We weren't tipsy, though we'd had some drinks, and so I've got absolutely no idea what happened that night. Answer: I have an uncle that experiences things like this fairly regularly. He's a pretty serious guy and not one to make things up, so I believe him. One of the stories, for instance, was that he was driving down a country road after shopping and saw a family walking on the side of the road in the middle of summer in St. Louis, so it was hot, but the family was all wearing odd clothes, and the first thing he noticed was none of them wore shoes. The clothes were more like shawls or wraps. It was a man and woman with a child, so he stopped to offer a ride since it was hot as shoot, and they were in the middle of nowhere, and they agreed, and the man said their house was just a few miles down the road. So he drives them up and drops them off at a little cottage-like house on the side of the road. A few weeks pass, and he's with my aunt driving, who he had told this story to, and he said, "Up here is the house I dropped that family off at." And when they got up there, there was no house, no nothing. It was just the ditch and grass. Nothing was ever there. So, who knows? I'm super skeptical about anything like that. But the fact that it was him that told me and my aunt corroborating it made me wonder. Story 6. Back when I was a kid, my grandmother had a really close friend who used to help her babysit us. One day she goes missing. Family doesn't know where she is, and we don't either. About a week later, police find her body in a dumpster. She had been dead for 4 to 5 days. She had been mugged and had several stab wounds. Incredibly tragic. Who would mug an old lady? Here's the spooky story. A few days just before she was found, my 3 cousins swore they saw her walking around in their backyard and knocking on their window. The following day had search going through the area. It wasn't until the body was found that we realized what they saw couldn't be true according to police timeline, but they swore it was her. Edit. I'm adding more context for the story. I initially kept it brief because I didn't want to have a wall of text, but since this blew up a bit, I'll include more details. The backyard was actually pretty big and long because it was shared by the entire apartment complex, which had 4 units, 2 upstairs, 2 down. My cousins were in the downstairs unit on the left. Again, like I said in a different post, it was gated on all sides by wooden fencing. My cousin's window had blind spots, so you couldn't see the entire backyard. It wasn't nighttime, but the sun was setting. They said it was almost down at this point, so I assume around 7 p.m. They're in their room, which has a window that sees into the backyard. It was ghetto, and they were pretty poor, so their beds only had the mattress, not the frame supporting it. It was a queen and a single pressed up against the wall with the window. So basically, to look into the backyard, you were standing up on a mattress looking against how you normally face. Back against the wall, sitting down on the mattress. Youngest brother. Holy. Shoot, there's someone in the back. She just walked away. Oldest laying down on the bed. WTF are you talking about? Youngest, dude. It looks like old lady. She's walking around where Grandma's vegetable garden is. Oldest, youngest, come fudge, look. She's just walked away. Oldest goes and looks. I don't see anything. Stop being stupid. Goes back to laying down. Little one stands there looking at him. Middle brother comes to look a moment later. Oh shoot, she's right there. TF, she's coming to us. They all look to see the lady knocking on the window. They scream, panic, and run out to Dad. Dad obviously doesn't believe them, but after a bit gives in. He goes out and checks. Nothing. So just a side note. The way these apartments were connected, you couldn't go into the backyard from your individual unit. You had to get out into the main hall, which had a door that opened into the backyard.
Story 7.
4 years ago, I lived in a very large farmhouse that was converted into 2 apartments. The house was known as the Old Boys' Home. It was used to house boys with behavioral issues, but was closed due to allegations of molestation. Anyway, I was living with my boyfriend and 3-year-old daughter at the time. My bedroom had a large fireplace that had been boarded up and painted over. I decided to push my bed up against it one day while I was rearranging things. It was like a headboard. That night, around 1 a.m., I had heard a small voice saying, "Mom, Mom, Mommy." I had sat up in bed, but didn't see anything, so I reached over my boyfriend, trying to grab my daughter and put her in our bed. I kept feeling around, and I was still hearing the voice, but I couldn't feel her. My boyfriend woke up and turned the bedside lamp on, asking me, "What the hell are you doing?" I explained that Amelia was trying to get in our bed, and I was reaching for her. There was nobody there. My daughter was sound asleep in her room. Then the next night came. Around 1 a.m. again, my dog had started to whimper at outdoor, so my boyfriend got up to take him outside. You know that feeling in a bed when someone lies down next to you, where the bed pushes in and there is a warmth in your back. I felt that, so I assumed my boyfriend had come back to bed. I rolled over. My boyfriend wasn't in the bed, and I felt the fudge bed release pressure. Whatever was laying next to me has gotten up in that second. I moved my bed the next day to the other side of the room, and I never had another incident in the 2 years I remained in that house. Story 8. I never see these until my post will be at the end, but this was weird. My wife and I were having a great weekend in Las Vegas when my father-in-law passed away in the early morning hours. We get the call and all jerk to get back to the rest of the family. After a couple of hours, the family is all together and talking, sharing memories when we arrive. Shortly after we arrive, it gets brought up. How are we going to share this news with our niece, who was in prison at the time? While trying to figure it out, a call comes from out of nowhere. It's our niece, and she asks what happened to Grandpa. She had a dream that he visited her and said goodbye. She freaks and calls us. Weird. Answer: that's really weird and comforting in a way. I do wonder what dreams are accessing sometimes. My grandma did a slightly similar thing once. Her son, my uncle, who lived at the other end of the country and rarely saw her, was having adult beverage problems, and his life was basically spiraling out of control. We kept this information from my grandma, as she was in her 90s and not really lucid all the time, and we knew she wouldn't cope well with it. As far as she was aware, her son was as happy and successful as ever, and we didn't give her the slightest hint that wasn't the case. Then, one day, we got a call that he'd been arrested for drink driving and was spending the night in custody. That next day, my grandma said she'd had a dream that she'd visited her son in prison, and in that visit discovered that he'd become an alcoholic. We had to sensitively tell her that she was right. Story 9. I went to use the bathroom at work, and when I entered, there was no one in there. The bathroom has 4 urinals and 4 stalls, 1 handicap, and I did not see any feet in any of the stalls. I took up my normal spot inside one stall and was doing my business when I heard the sound of someone peeing into one of the urinals. But no one had entered the bathroom. The door is heavy and loud when it closes, so I would have heard someone entering. After a normal amount of time, the peeing stopped, and I heard a few footsteps, but the door never opened. When I finished up, I did a cursory look, and there was no one in the bathroom. It's a ridiculous story, but I definitely heard a pee ghost. Story 10. My wife and I stayed at a nice hotel in downtown Pittsburgh. It was where I asked her to marry me after a lavish meal. I picked the room because it came with a huge Japanese soaking tub that me, a 6'1" man, could barely see over the edge of. Anyway, the first night we stayed there, we were sleeping in the single king bed. I believe the alarm clock said it was 2 or 3 a.m. To my left, and just a few feet from me, I heard the sound of what seemed like a pencil slowly rolling down a sloped surface. It was so deliberate and loud that it woke us both up. It was also so deliberate that, while my heart thumped in my chest from the sudden noise, I quickly convinced myself that it was a pencil sliding off the desk in our room, and I went back to sleep. The next morning, to my surprise, I found that A, there were no pencils in the room, and B, there was no desk. It was my first night in the room, so I assumed that it, like other hotels, had a place to sit and write. Well, that was not the case. The only thing I could find to write with were ballpoint pens with their caps on. They wouldn't make that distinctive, loud noise that a ridged wooden pencil makes as it rolls. Furthermore, there was no sloped surface in the room for anything to suddenly roll off of in the middle of the night morning. The whole thing was weird enough for us to talk about it that morning. I do not believe in ghosts, but to be honest, I'd love to encounter something unexplained. I entertained the idea of a ghost pencil, but knew in my head it had an explanation grounded in reality. But that's not all that happened.